Building Phylogenies, Part 1. On block day, we will collect and/or observe organisms at a nearby field, forest, and stream. We will use our observations and inferences to build a phylogeny. A phylogeny is a hypothesis about evolutionary relationships between organisms. It's usually drawn like a tree. It will be extremely helpful to watch the steps we will use to construct a phylogeny before we gather our data. This will give you a better idea of the kinds of traits you want to pay attention to. You will want to watch part 2 of this video again as you sit down to build an organism traits table and make that table into a tree. Part 1. Traits. You should pay special attention to traits that affect the properties of life. Order. What kind of order does the organism have? Does it have a right, left, top, bottom, belly, and back? If so, it has bilateral symmetry. Does it have clear segments, or one long continuous body? How does the organism regulate nutrients or process energy? Unless you happen to watch it eating or pooping, you will use inferences to determine this. Heterotrophs eat, and autotrophs perform tasks like photosynthesis to get energy. These two things are traits. Green pigmentation might be evidence of what? A mouth or an anus is evidence of what? Water. Does the organism live within water or outside of it? This is a trait. Which lifestyle do you think is more likely to be ancestral? How does the organism reproduce? Of course, you'll have to use inferences for this, probably. What kinds of structures or traits provide clues to this? What kinds of structures allow organisms to respond to the environment? These often make good traits to use, as do the position of these structures, or the number that an organism has. You're now ready to start collecting data. I think it will help to watch part 2 before you collect. This way you will understand what we do with the data once we have it. However, if you don't have time, you've watched enough to go to the stream on block day. After we've collected data, part 2. Once we decide what traits to pay attention to for an organism, we want to make a table of traits. For each trait, we can indicate whether or not the organism exhibits the trait. When we use traits to build a phylogeny, which is essentially assigning evolutionary relationships, we are assuming traits are homologous. Homologous traits are traits that organisms share because they inherited them from a common ancestor. Step 1. Building a traits data table. Spread out your notes, drawings, and observations of organisms. Look at your data and also think about traits you thought might be important before you began. Now you write the traits you will use as column headings. For row headings, you will want to assign each observed organism a letter or name if you know it. I'll help you name things as we complete this process. For this demonstration, I will only use 8 total organisms to make the example simple. You are required to use at least 18 organisms that we observed or collected. Now move along the row and mark each box to indicate whether or not the organism exhibits each trait. As you build the tree, use scrap pieces of paper. This will allow you to make changes and also make multiple trees and decide which one is best. It is often easiest to start at the leaves and work down. Try to find organisms that are identical for your chosen traits and make them a group at the top of the tree like this. Now try to find other groups and do the same thing. Next, find groups that are very similar that only differ by 1 or 2 traits. It will be easiest to place them next to each other at the top of the tree. Now think about the traits that differ. Do they seem to be traits that the common ancestor that was most primitive to both groups had? Or do they seem to be traits that evolved later in time in groups independently? The first scenario looks like this. One group lost the trait recently in evolutionary time on its branch. Each branch represents an evolutionary step. If the difference arose later in the group that has it, it will look like this. To connect each branch to the tree, we will have to determine which traits were likely to have evolved later. Remember, the usual paradigm when drawing a phylogeny is further back in time is closer to the base of the tree. Once you've connected all the pieces in the tree and marked when each trait evolved or was lost, you're ready to try a few other versions of the tree. You will try to find the one with the most parsimony, which means the least evolutionary steps. Make sure that you've labeled all the steps of the tree and that you label the base of the tree with the traits you believe the common ancestor to have had from your chart. These will be the traits that root your tree. Congratulations, you have constructed a phylogeny from inferred and observed organism traits.